firstly, I'd just like to thank you so much for joining us here today at HQTS's Industry Expert Interview Series. Before we actually begin the questions and the interview, I think it'd be really great for our listeners and our viewers to be able to get a short introduction from yourself and your role at the Scottish Food Crime and Incidents Unit, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so my name is Ron McNaughton and I'm the head of the Scottish Food Crime and Incidents Unit at Food Standards Scotland. The unit has been up and running since about 2015 and it's the intelligence and investigation arm of Food Standards Scotland. We have a team of about 15 people who focus purely on dealing and tackling food fraud impacting on Scotland. Most of those individuals have a background in law enforcement and come with an extensive experience in the investigation of serious crime. I personally was a career police officer in Scotland for over 30 years before I joined Food Standards Scotland in 2015, and the latter part of my career focused mainly on dealing with tackling serious and organised crime, and in particular the investigation of the distribution of supply control drugs. So slightly different to what I was used to in the police service, but what we've tried to do within the Scottish Food Crime and Incidents Unit is to bring a law enforcement approach to tackling fraud in complex and serious fraud in food supply chains.
Thank you so much. Very comprehensive, and I appreciate that. Really great to have your insight today. So I guess we'll just go straight into it. So our first question for you today is talking about counterfeit goods. And in your opinion, what would you say are the most common counterfeit foods that kind of come through? And also, how can organizations identify them?
Okay, that's quite a difficult question, Andrew. But I mean, I think probably first of all, we probably should look at the types of food fraud that there are. That would help to explain then the how foods can be counterfeited. So you've got obviously adulteration, so reducing the quality of a food product through the inclusion of a foreign substance with the intention either to make production costs lower or apparent quality higher. Could be substitution, replacing a food product or ingredient with another substance of a similar but inferior kind. It might be misrepresentation of origin, quality, provenance or benefits, so the marketing or labelling of a product so as to inaccurately portray its quality, safety, benefit, origin or freshness. But it could simply be misrepresentation of durability dates, it could be document fraud, it could be theft, it could be unlawful processing, or it could be waste diversion. So from our point of view in the UK, like a lot of countries, it should be pointed out that the vast majority of businesses out there are legitimate and want to provide high quality products for consumers. However, we can't rest on our laurels, and we know that there are individuals and groups of individuals out there who want to make money from food fraud. We're dealing with global food supply chains, and that adds significantly to the problem. Counterfeit food is made with no regard for safety standards, quality or efficiency. It may contain the correct ingredients but an unknown origin. It may be lacking certain important ingredients, or they may have been replaced with less expensive ones. Counterfeit food and drink damages particular food sectors, impacts on the economic well-being of countries, adversely impacts on consumers, and in some cases it poses a significant risk to public health. If I can give you some examples of counterfeit products that we've came across previously. When I say we've came across previously, I mean in general terms, food fraud that's been uncovered, probably internationally. Olive oil, so that might have been diluted with soybean or vegetable oil, or even fabricated entirely from cheaper oil that's been additional products added to it. You may look for the extra virgin label. We've had lots of failures of extra virgin oil in the past. Honey's a popular product. We've seen honey before that's been identified as having sucrose, beet sugar, or even high fructose corn syrups in it. Fish is another popular one. Fish fraud, increased profits by passing off a cheap fish in place of an expensive one. And we've seen recent studies in the past, but as part of Operation Opson a couple of years ago, we worked with another 11 European countries looking at illegally treated tuna. So tuna destined for the canning industry, which had been illegally treated with nitrates and nitrites, so it could be sold as fresh. And the European Commission, they described that as a €200 million fraud per year. But the safety risks, so there's potential histamine poisoning, potential massive impact on consumers purchasing if the product can't be trusted, a massive impact on the genuine tuna industry having to compete with cheats. But you'll feel an impact in any case if consumer trust and confidence is lost, and that's a big thing. What we found in terms of that was the illegal treatment of tuna as an established, ongoing, and highly organised criminal practice taking place across Europe and third countries exporting into the European Union and further afield. But fish, it could be species substitution and mislabeling. They're difficult to detect when fish morphological features such as heads, tails, and fins are removed, and fish are processed into fillets or ready-to-eat breaded or battered products. Products are highly prepared, highly processed in pre-prepared fish meals. So that could be a significant problem for allergy sufferers, where the fish that the person is allergic to has been used has been substituted for the intended product. And we've seen instances of white tuna being found to actually be escalar, an oily cheap fish that causes digestive problems. We can't wait till someone dies or becomes unwell. We need to become far better informed in terms of the risks that we face in terms of food fraud in general, but more particularly where there are risks in relation to allergens in the food chain. We've also seen herbs and spices, so we've seen fraud in relation to saffron, sage, black pepper, oregano. Alcohol, we have seen a number of cases over the years involving alcohol. In terms of consumers being able to identify counterfeited food, it's very difficult. There are very few breakout areas for food fraud. If you've been the victim of financial fraud, then you're likely to notice, however, it's much more complicated with food. What consumers can do is they can read the labels carefully, they can check the origin of the product, they can consider the value for money factor. If the price seems too good to be true, then it probably is. And if they suspect something isn't quite right, then they should report it to the authorities, report it to the regulators. As people working within industry, though, who are most likely to be aware that there's been something untoward going on in food production, we've got to ensure that there's a safe place for these individuals to come forward and the knowledge that their identities will be protected. In Scotland, we have a Scottish Food Crime Hotline, which operates 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. And consumers and those working in the food industry, they can call it hotline free and it's confidential. So there are ways and means that those who may have information or may have been the victim of food fraud can come forward.
Yeah, that's really great. I think, as you said, it's just really important for organizations to be vigilant, pay attention, and, as you said, if it's too good to be true, it probably is. I think that's something that organizations can really benefit from and be perceptive. So thank you very much. So moving on from that, and you mentioned the pandemic there, and that's actually moving on to our next question. So in your opinion, do you think the pandemic has, had a significant impact on, food fraud and this type of activities because of the supply chain disruptions, obviously with furloughed staff in the UK, in the earlier aspects of the pandemic? And do you think that if there is an increase, it's going to help bring forth new regulations and policies in the near future?
Well, yeah, I suppose, what's the threat from the pandemic in relation to food fraud? Well, there's greater opportunity for criminality related to food over the short, medium and longer terms. And that's relevant to every country globally. I suppose, why is that? Well, there's financial uncertainty and pressures on businesses, and because of this, legitimate businesses may stray into non-compliant or fraudulent behaviours in the short to medium terms. There are regulator resource limitations, so regulators in lots of countries, including the UK, are diverted onto other competing demands. So that might mean there's less inspections. It might mean there's less opportunity to detect criminality that's ongoing. That whole pressure on supply chains might mean we see substitution of ingredients or additives. As I said, the global supply disruption has been well documented, and this could introduce new contaminant or adulteration risks. What I would call criminality crossover, which is the potential for individuals or groups traditionally involved in other types of criminality to seek to move into the food sector with the purpose of committing food fraud. It becomes more vulnerable because of these pressures on food supply chains, and there's maybe that fraud opportunity that suddenly becomes available. Food supplements, things being advertised as cure for a defence against COVID-19. We've seen that in the past. The areas for exploitation are significant, particularly with the stresses on the supply chains, as I've said. We've seen panic buying previously. We might see that again. That adds to the problem. The thing with the pandemic is it isn't over. And we don't know when it's going to be over. And we don't know what the actual result of this is all going to be from a food fraud perspective. What are the influencing factors? Well, there's high demand for specific food items, which give the potential opportunity for substituted or counterfeit product to be used. There's a significant increase in online food purchases by consumers, where supply chain information might be limited. We've got changing consumer buying habits, and that presents criminal opportunity for financial gain. And then there's increased anxiety and fears that may create a vulnerability for exploitation by those adulterating, substituting or misrepresenting food. What might we see? Well, it's slightly probable that we've already experienced shipments entering our countries which have been subject to adulteration, substitution, or misrepresentation to varying degrees. I don't think yet we're in a position where we've been able to assess the full scale of that globally. I think the further we get through the crisis, the more information will become available, and we can see just what impact food fraud has had on all our countries, really. Probably none of the risks will be new to anyone who will be looking in on this, but food fraud continues in any case. However, the current situation probably makes the likelihood of these types of things being experienced in our individual countries more likely. Whether we're going to see new regulations or policies, that's a real difficult one, and they may very well be. Although I don't have any specific examples I could provide at the moment. We've seen countries issue new guidance as a result of the pandemic, including in the UK. We've issued new guidance to kind of help businesses and industry. I think only time will tell. We haven't seen a significant increase in information highlighting that there has been a significant increase in food fraud as a result of the pandemic. But as I've said, it might take some time for that information to filter through. One thing is I suppose it's the new normal. And just because we did things the way we did things before doesn't mean we'll just fall back to doing the things that we did previously. There's been lots of changes in processes in terms of how food's regulated, and that might change. That might be a change for the better. I think we'll just have to see how it all pans out over the next few months and the next year.
Yeah, that's really, again, fantastic. I think I definitely agree with you there, as you said, still in the pandemic. We have to, things will change as everything else evolves as well, I think, as you were saying. So moving on from that one, onto responsibility of food safety. And in your opinion, which party would you say should be responsible for the maintenance of food safety standards and procedures? And with that, how can organizations ensure that their suppliers are not committing food fraud?
Okay, I mean, that's a simple one for me. Food businesses are responsible for providing safe, authentic food. It's as simple as that. Consumers need to be able to trust that a particular product is what it says it is on the label, and businesses have to have confidence in their supply chains. That said, we all have a part to play. And when I say we, I mean regulators and law enforcement, I mean food businesses and industry, and I mean consumers. We've got an approach in Scotland called the 3 lines of defence that we've adopted involving these 3 groups. Working together in this way, it contributes to raising awareness of food fraud. It helps to develop the intelligence picture to give us enough insight to make effective decisions to mitigate risk. It helps in identifying instances of criminality, supporting investigations, and that includes multi-agency organisational collaboration. It assists with prevention and enforcement activity. I mean, although there always will be a place for enforcement, I can't emphasise enough, really, the importance of information and intelligence sharing to be better informed and to focus on prevention. These are the areas we need to focus on by working together if we want to have a real impact on food fraud. Food traceability is extremely important. You know, it's intended to guarantee food safety, but can also guarantee food authenticity. And to explain traceability, what I mean is the path followed by a specific ingredient or batch of food as it passes from one commercial enterprise to another within the supply chain. In practice, the flow of goods, they should be accompanied by a flow of information, which needs to be recorded and considered at each step. Companies need to make sure they've got good food fraud resilience. They need to do their due diligence. They need to ensure that they do their due diligence, and they need to take reasonable steps to ensure that the security of the supply chain is maintained. It's not good enough to just go one step back. Businesses need to do everything they can to ensure the authenticity of their products. They should ask themselves a number of questions to kind of help with that, okay? So how well as an organisation do we understand the nature and cost of fraud affecting us? Do we have an effective strategy to address the problem? Do we have a counter-fraud structure to implement our strategy? Are we in a position to take a range of proactive and reactive actions to counter fraud? Do we address and manage food fraud like any other business issue? And if not, why not? An organisation that's fraud resilient will have strong systems and processes in place in respect of each of these. Fraud's a specific problem, it's got specific solutions, but it requires a counter-fraud approach. The emphasis of counter-fraud work should be on prevention rather than on detection. Proving the effectiveness of counter-fraud work requires a focus on outcomes and not activities. So you need to develop an anti-fraud culture. So the right tone from senior management in the context of effective governance arrangements, that sends a clear message about what's acceptable and what's unacceptable. Creating a strong deterrence effect, so developing a strong anti-fraud culture involves communicating messages to mobilise the honest majority, and creating a strong deterrent effect involves communicating different messages to the dishonest majority. Reducing the fraud opportunity. So once the nature and fraud once the nature and extent of fraud is defined, a systematic review of systems, processes, and contracts should be undertaken to identify potential vulnerabilities. The vulnerabilities that enable fraud should be designed out of any processes, systems, or contracts, and the review should be prioritised to reflect the nature and extent of fraud affecting that particular business. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, great. I think, as you said, I think it's really interesting what you're saying about internal culture and developing, it's not so much about detection, but it's prevention, and building that into your internal processes from C-suite all the way around and sharing that knowledge is key. So brilliant. And speaking about, you'd mentioned surveillance and understanding where these food travels from. Our next question to you actually is about blockchain. Now, blockchain is an emerging technology that's been helping a lot of different industries like fashion be able to have full tracking of the kind of supply chain for manufacturers of where things go. Do you think that this technology is going to become prevalent in the next few years within the kind of food fraud prevention and in your opinion, if so, how do manufacturers kind of prepare for this and get ready to adapt for this kind of new technology that's coming into the market?
Yeah, I mean, I think blockchain it's a very interesting concept. It's not my specialist subject. However, you've already spoken about the importance of traceability, and there's no doubt in theory, blockchain, it could be the holy grail that the food industry's been looking for as a potential solution for food fraud. But as I said, I'm not an expert on blockchain, but there's no doubt that traditional record keeping systems, they can be vulnerable to fraud, they can be vulnerable to cyber attack. I suppose the beauty of blockchain is that it's a shared ledger. It can't be changed. It records records transactions, as you said. It tracks assets. And virtually anything of value can be tracked and traded on a blockchain network. And such a system does reduce the risk and cuts costs for everyone. Businesses rely on information to operate. The faster it's received, the more accurate it is, better. And I suppose blockchain provides immediate, shared and transparent information. And in theory, it provides a single version of the truth and therefore allows for greater confidence in a product or ingredients, which sounds great. You know, without doubt, it sounds great. That said, for blockchain to work, everyone on your supply chain needs to use it. I mean, I'm not sure of the costs, but that may be an issue for some smaller businesses who may not be able to afford the technology to secure their supply chains. I'd also say the system's only as good as the information that's input into it. And if that's not accurate in the first place, then there's a problem. And we've discussed the pressures on global supply chains as a result of COVID-19 and legitimate businesses being pushed into cutting corners and perhaps using lower quality ingredients in order to cut costs. So would that have an impact in terms of the information that's put into the blockchain? That's another question I'd probably ask. So for me, we need to be sure that blockchain does what it says it does and is as secure as everyone claims it to be. I think there's still some way to go in ensuring this. However, if it is, then I've got no doubt we'll see blockchain evolve and become an extremely important addition to securing the global supply chain as we move forward. It's so broadly applicable to many areas, and it has the potential to enhance and improve the next generation of distributed and online services. It could revolutionise the way transactional trust is established, to be honest with you. There's no doubt, however, that it'll probably take decades for it to become a normal part of our economic and social infrastructure. But I suppose the good news is that it's already started. And we know that some companies are already using blockchain technology, so that's really good, and I think it does bode well for the future. But for me, I still need a bit more information to totally convince myself that this is definitely going to be the panacea for us moving forward.
Yeah, totally agree with you as well. It takes time for people to onboard it and develop that through time. So hopefully, once the future comes in, more organizations onboard that, then other organizations as well will be able to say, well, this works, and they'll be able to hopefully have a more universal application for it and actually use it. Great, fantastic. So final question for you today, and that is moving on to what is the role of quality control or quality assurance in preventing food fraud and also in the food supply chain sustainability as well?
Okay, well, I mean, regulators and law enforcement won't be able to solve the food fraud issue alone through enforcement. We can't enforce our way out of this. And as I've highlighted earlier, there are very few breakout areas where consumers are aware that they're victim of food fraud. So we need to move away from being reactive, and there needs to be a real focus on proactivity and prevention with a real need to work closely with industry. I mean, put simply, quality control helps prevent product recalls, and whether these are food safety or for non-compliant products, they assist with protecting brand reputation and maintaining production costs, and they assist in ensuring regulatory compliance. Companies' reputations take years to build, but can disappear overnight if consumer confidence in a product is adversely impacted upon due to issues related to the safety or authenticity of a particular product. Food businesses, they need to be proactive in their quality control and be in a position to manage issues real time. And that facilitates continuous improvement and helps companies develop a sustainable competitive advantage. Excellent quality control or quality assurance processes, they're necessary in order to provide critical information to the right person at the right time to ensure a proactive response. It encourages continuous improvement within a company, it improves yield, it reduces waste, it avoids damaging and costly product recalls. Good quality management should ensure improved quality without disrupting company operations as well. I spoke earlier about the importance of being proactive. Quality assurance focuses on preventing quality issues, whereas quality control focuses on identifying quality issues in manufactured products. Both are equally important in ensuring food safety and preventing fraud. So I would emphasise that. But having robust systems in place that'll target harden your business and make you less vulnerable to fraud. It's as simple as that.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. I think definitely it's really important to be able to be on top of it, to be able to protect, as you said, the brand, and making sure that, as you said, a mistake, it takes years for a brand to build, but one mistake can really damage it. So it's great to have that stamp of approval and that assurance to make sure it's all okay. So with that, that's actually all we have time for today. That's all of our questions answered. So I'd just like to thank you so much, Ron, for joining us today. It's been great to get your insight and answering our questions and helping us get more understanding on food crime and food fraud. So thank you very much.
Thank you.